Welcome, listeners, to 100% Sale of Journalism Ethics here, a weekly news review podcast with me, Kaushal Bhatia.
And Sailesh.
For all the first time listeners of this one episode old podcast, here's how it'll go. Sailesh and myself have selected a few stories that broke out or developed in the last week from certain beats and give our 2 cents on the same. Each one of us will talk about a story that we have researched, starting with me. In the first minute, we have to narrate the story in as much detail as possible, and the following 2 to 3 minutes is open for group discussion. And yes, it is going to be as boring as it sounds. So we are hoping to get a loyal following of at least 5 people, and this time it does not include our parents because they are definitely not listening to us, and I'm not talking about this podcast.
But last time we had about 33 people listening to us.
Yes, because
So,
the ones we bought did come through, huh?
yeah, true. The Bacha connection worked. Your connection with Bacha.
Yeah, what was that song that we love? DJ Wale Babu. Yes, that is the classic. The classic DJ Wale Babu. Let's let's begin. The first beat that we're going to talk about is national news.
Hmm.
So this is from the Indian Express.
Okay.
The byline is credited to Abhinav Rajput. And here's the headline. At DDA meeting, unauthorized colony residents get a voice for first time. There are close to 1700 such colonies in the city, and an estimated 40 lakh out of Delhi's 2 crore people live here. They house at least 40 lakh people in the city, but for the first time on Wednesday, representatives from unauthorized colonies were consulted about the city's development and design. In an online exercise, the Delhi Development Authority on Wednesday reached out to RWAs of unauthorized colonies to seek their opinion in the formation of Master Plan for Delhi 2041. After the Union Cabinet had given ownership rights to unauthorized colonies in Delhi last year, DDA's exercise is also seen in the light of giving fresh impetus to opening roads for redevelopment in the area. Leenu Sehgal, Commissioner of Planning Department DDA, said the most of the residents complained of basic civic issues. One thing that has come out is that people said that they were ready to pay user charges if given facilities, she said. So, this is the story.
Yeah.
And the reason I selected this is
Hmm.
because I was reading, as you know, Isha Judge Ahluwalia just recently came out with a memoir
Yeah.
in which is titled Breaking Through. I found
Yeah.
that out through the print as
Yeah.
Shekhar Gupta introduced that book. But since that
Really?
wasn't available, I bought the book Postcards for Change, which is a collection of her columns, which she used to
Yeah.
write for the Indian Express. And while
Okay.
reading this, I was like, I think this is a very great step
Yeah.
because she had given such great examples of changes that have taken place in our country in certain places which are not considered urban, but they have
Okay.
been in the push to urbanize. They've taken all the stakeholders who live there and all the
Yeah.
landowners. They've pulled their land together
Yeah.
in a consensual way. They've made a nature friendly and a very greatly functioning city. So I feel this is a good direction to go at. What do you think, Sailesh?
Um, from what I know about this thing is that running to the elections, Delhi Assembly elections, the AAP government banked on this plank. They
Yeah.
promoted this whole thing where they said the unauthorized colonies that are there in Delhi, they are getting water connections and at the same time electricity connections. So to in a way give them some legitimacy, give them the basic facilities that people need to survive. So I know this personally that uh, in Delhi there are a lot of unauthorized colonies, and there's a whole social dynamic why they come up. And you living in Mumbai, you also know that the whole reason for the unauthorized colonies to come up, and then eventually they become like a staple of any big city. So I think
Right.
if these people are working towards making them more legitimate, giving them the basic facilities, and improving their quality of life, that's a very good step
And
in
that's
terms
what
of
the government should do because
exactly.
people
Yeah.
are going to go towards better economic opportunities. which obviously you won't be able to find in, a place which is more agrarian. I mean, not to say
Correct.
anything bad about that. We've got
No,
great,
correct.
great states which have producing, which are, their sole revenue is from agrarian activities, like Punjab, for example.
Correct.
And but the thing is, everyone pushes towards urbanization. And I'll just take a quote from Judge Ishar Ahluwalia's introduction from the Postcards of for Change in that
Correct.
book, where she mentions that the urban population of India, as measured in the census, increased from 26%, that is
Okay.
217 million in 1991, to
Yeah.
31% in 2011. Now, this is like 9 years back.
Yeah.
So she basically talked about the fact that there was a image that was created about the urban being a bad place, a place full of capitalists and people who will thieve you and all of that. But contrary to what the image has been made, people do go and migrate to these cities to get better economic opportunities, as we've seen.
And I feel it's not only about the economic opportunities, it's about social mobility as well. If a person wants to get a good engineering degree, train himself well, get exposed and get experience, these companies are set up near urban areas. For example, Noida. If
Hmm.
a boy who's worked on his father's farm in childhood, uh, in a UP village, he will definitely not find, if he wants to get into plastics, manufacture them, become an engineer who looks after those factories,
Hmm.
he may not get those job opportunities in the village. He'll have to go to Noida and Gurgaon and Bhiwadi and those areas in Rajasthan which have become industrialized. So it's not only that it's got to do with economics, it's also got to do with uh, aspirations. So those people want to eventually move to cities. They want their kids to have a better education, have other opportunities other than farming and all those things. And secondly, it's a basic truth about any big city. People who are moving them, they may not be resourceful, so these unauthorized colonies, they are bound to come up in those areas. So the sooner the government starts paying attention and starts making amenities available for them, their harassment and their exploitation will be minimized at the same time.
And on the note of the farmers, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
in the same book, in the introduction, she's mentioned
Yeah.
that people frequently speak of the high standards of living of farmers in other countries, but that is because they are a very small number of farmers relative to land. Like in the United States, the ratio of farmers to arable land is 15 per hectare. In
No, you're saying the book mentions that the high standard of living in certain countries.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
definitely, like the Western countries, the European countries, because the amount of
Netherlands, Denmark, for example.
exactly. So
Okay.
basically, they talk about that while it's a great thing, and we are very proud of the agrarian roots that we have, and the fact that we produced a lot of vegetation, and we are a agrarian country in the most part. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it is better if much of the population moves to higher productivity jobs like services, so that
Correct.
there are the farmers which are doing the farming will have enough land and they can get a sizable profit. Otherwise, they are really not having enough, and so that is
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
these
Correct.
problems occur.
I
Uh,
think the government's focus has been to reduce the amount of people who work in the agricultural sector, and
hmm.
that was to an extent being accomplished. Now, because of the COVID situation, some people have gone back, but this is a temporary setback. So those people are gonna eventually go back to the cities, start working and all. So I feel, as it is in a developed country, a very small population is working in the farm sector,
Hmm.
and productivity is high. Like for example, China is producing 3 times of what we produce in 1 acre. So we
Wow.
have to increase our productivity. That
Yes.
should be. But anyways, that is digressing from the topic.
Right. But on that note, we'll move on to the next beat,
Okay.
and that is the one that you're taking.
National
National
politics.
politics. You can take it away
Yeah.
whenever you're ready.
Now, so the story we selected for this week is Samajwadi Party sacks Lotan Ram Nishad. Now, uh, this story was actually, it came up on the wires that this fellow Lotan Ram Nishad is basically the Samajwadi Party's former OBC cell chief. So what happened? in August, end of August, is he was removed from the post. And what led up to that is the reason why this story is more important. So the print, uh,
Hmm.
there is a particular show they started recently, which is Deepak Mandal ki Pathshala. So a
Hmm.
senior journalist in Hindi tells the viewers about a certain incident that has happened in politics and all, or
Hmm.
he explains it. It's an explainer video format. So he talked about this, and he said the reason this story is very important is because the lead up to what has happened. The story is not that he was removed. The story is why he was removed.
Correct.
So what has happened is, during a meeting in one of the UP towns, cities,
Hmm.
Lotan Nishad was asked about the Bhumi Pujan in Ayodhya and all those things. So he said that, me coming from a party that is working towards the oppressed class, and following the thought process of that is inspired from Ram Manohar Lohia and all those things. I
Hmm.
am a person who doesn't have a lot of faith in Lord Ram. For me, he's more like a fictional character. And
Hmm.
for me, people like Jyotiba Phule, B.R. Ambedkar, who have worked for the backward classes and tried to bring them up in the society, or tried to decrease their oppression, I follow them more. So now
Hmm.
this is a standard reply for someone who's a member of Samajwadi Party or BSP Party, because their whole focus is not religion centric. Theirs is more like class. It has to do
Socialism.
with class. Yeah. So what he after he said this, the BJP picked up on this. So
Hmm.
the BJP in UP, the unit in UP, they started making a noise about it. They started saying this is a very bad thing of for him to say, and there was some noise. And as a reaction to this, Samajwadi Party sacked Lotan Ram Mishra. So now what has happened in this case is that Dilip Mandal has argued that BJP has set its plank. It is a Hindutva party,
Hmm.
or it is closely linked to the religion. So they have set certain goals, and they have never digressed from it under no circumstance, no matter
Correct.
how much it has cost them electorally. They have always stood by their three or four goals that they have set: article 370, nuclear, building a nuclear, testing a nuclear weapon, becoming a nuclear power, then at the same time building a temple in Ayodhya. So
Yes.
for them, they picked it up. They said, Lotan Ram Nishad has, in a way insulted their sentiments. And under this pressure, the SP caved and, gave way to what
So
BJP
I guess
wanted.
I guess what you're trying to say is that he made a comment which is obviously in the popular sentiment it is not appreciated greatly, and BJP being BJP has riled it up, made it a really big issue, put it in the news and all, made it a PR thing. And I think because of that, Samajwadi Party has sacked their own minister, who is quite
Not
progressive, I think.
minister, OBC cell chief.
Yes, my apologies. OBC
Yeah,
cell chief,
yeah,
who is quite progressive. I think that's a great way to have, because he's thinking about institution builders of our country, right?
correct,
He's
correct.
talking about reformists. He's talking about Ram Manohar Lohia. He's talking about Jyotibai Phule. He's talking about B.R. Ambedkar, who's written the Constitution of India. So these are institution makers. Now, if he's
Yeah.
saying that, what is something that is so wrong that you have to
So
sack him?
so that's the thing that Deepak Mandal answers. He says that uh, what BJP has done in Indian politics right now is it's set the theme for politics, and it is to do with religion. So you see Congress doing soft Hindutva. You see other parties talking about religion more than they would otherwise have not talked about it. So what he's saying is BJP has set the game, others are playing by its rules. So it is directly, if you're going to beat if you want to beat BJP at the game that they have set, it is nearly impossible.
Hmm. Yes.
That's the main point, that you guys are not this. You guys are not talking about, you never talked about religion. So you are digressing from your values to inculcate what is in trend right now. And secondly, what happens, it is not necessarily that, it's the sentiment of the majority. It may be that the majority in this country is Hindu. It is not their it may not necessarily, his Lotan Ram Nishat's
Correct.
comments may not necessarily hurt them,
Offend.
so
Yeah, yeah.
offend them. So in that case, what these guys are doing is they're trying to adapt to what BJP's success formula has been, and they are getting badly beaten uh,
I
by
think
the
I think
BJP
it's
while doing
wrong.
that.
It's wrong by sorry. I'm sorry if I interrupted,
No,
but
no.
I think it's bad for all these opposition parties who are now trying to do that soft Hinduism like you said, because all of them are doing it.
Correct.
Uh, like the issue when the Bhumi Pujan happened, I don't think except of Communist Party of India and Mamta Banerjee with her
Uh,
like
correct.
sly they've done like a very sly jibe. That also they've not opposed it completely as you
Correct.
would expect them because they are as in it's a moral thing. It's a
Hmm.
moral. The way it has happened, the way it is made, the way it has come to be is not a great thing. And in fact, if I might, there is a article that's written by Pratha Pratim Shil for the Wire, which I was talking to you about.
Hmm.
And when you pointed out this story, I was like, there's a paragraph in this which really, I think it speaks very closely to what we are talking about. And I'll
Okay.
just read it out. So I think you'll
Yeah.
get the context if I read it. So he
Yeah.
says there are actually, in my view, contrary to the arguments of Yadav's Yogendra Yadav
Yeah.
and others like him, the liberal nostalgia about Hinduism makes evident something that Dalit Bahujan thinkers have pointed out for long. The
Okay.
liberal elite in India was never divorced from its deep entanglements with their Hindu identity. The figure of the secular elite mocking religions is a straw figure, as in it's exaggerated. It was
Yeah.
something that the BJP just kind of created either with their IT cell or by influencing media
Uh,
partners or whatever it may be. But it is a
uh,
straw figure because you've never heard Congress or you've never heard Samajwadi Party outright being atheist or being anti-Hindu. They might
yeah.
have had their flaws in the way they functioned and there might have been graft. But I
Correct.
think that is something that is there in the full system. So there needs to be a proper reformation or a restructuring if it might but although I'm not very knowledgeable about the system in that depth, but I just feel that is the thing.
Yeah, and one more interesting thing Dilip Mandal speaks about is he said that in the mid 1990s during the election, there was a slogan. It was basically connecting two people, Samajwadi Party leader Mulayam Singh Yadav and Bahujan Samaj Party leader Kanchiram. And the
Hmm.
slogan was मिल मिल गए मुलायम कांची राम हवा में उड़ गए जय श्री राम. So
Ah.
this is the slogan that these parties used during elections in the mid 1990s, and in 1994 they formed their government in alliance. So
Hmm.
what he's trying to say is, did it offend Hindus? Did it necessarily cost them votes? No, they came into power after that. The alliance won. So the Samajwadi Party digressing from its values is in a way an direct advantage to BJP in UP.
Hmm. I guess yeah, that's true because they are going further away from the identity that they had earlier established. So
Correct.
right now it's difficult for the person to identify with any of these parties because the principles are well they are not
They
firm
are not
enough.
distinguishing themselves from
Yeah,
BJP.
they are
Then
not
the
firm
line
because
is
it's so wishy-washy.
yeah, exactly. Line is distinguishing line is disappearing. So
Right.
yeah, that's the story for this beat.
Okay. So on that note, we'll move on to the next beat, which I'm taking, and that is business.
Yeah.
So the article is on Live Mint, and the byline credit goes to Anulekha Ray.
Okay.
Here's the headline. Meet Vinod Kumar Yadav, the first ever CEO of 114-year-old Indian Railway Board.
Oh,
Vinod Kumar Yadav has made history by becoming the first chief executive officer of Railway Board. The central
hmm.
government on Wednesday formally constituted the Railway Board in the new avatar. Yadav has been
Yeah.
appointed as the chairman and CEO of the newly formed Railway Board. Well, there's a repetitive lines.
Okay.
Yadav was appointed as the chairman of Railway Board in 2019. Prior to this assignment, he has worked as general manager South Central Railway, and basically he's held a lot of posts. What this article is talking about is Vinod Kumar Yadav, who
Yeah.
was the chairman in the earlier board that existed, which has now become a leaner version of itself. And they've cut
Yeah.
down a few members because they want to make it, functioning efficiently and not to have like extra expenditure on salaries which are not contributing much. So I think this is a great
Hmm.
thing. And one thing that I really, the way IRCTC is going, because I think last year at some point, I don't remember the exact month, but they went to the stock market and they
Ah.
had an initial public offering. And people went crazy to buy those shares. In fact, I myself wanted to buy that share, but I was too lazy to open a demat account at this that point. And now I think things have become much easier because you can just buy shares from Google Pay. But I'm digressing. Let me continue. I think the way IRCTC has worked, first of all, there's immense potential, like immense, not only economic potential, but the use of railways is because it's the veins of the country, right? It's taking
Correct.
cargo from the central states to the port cities and states. It's kind of taking passengers in huge numbers from the
Correct.
cities to the countries to wherever people live and so on. And obviously tourism is there, so they have those royal kind of trains. And now they've also started
Correct.
putting up private trains, like Tejas and all is a private enterprise apparently, which is working
Yeah.
in IRCTC. Now, I was
Yeah.
doing some more research on
Yeah.
IRCTC, and I found out so the government of India owns 87.40% of the center public sector enterprise, and 20 million registered users are there who basically bought the shares. So I think this is great, and we both had discussed this, right? I think you were also very excited to buy shares of IRCTC.
Yeah.
And my point, the reason why I chose this is I think this is a great trajectory that it's going in. Obviously, I'm hoping that the profit comes pretty soon after that. And my question to you
Correct.
is, why
Hmm.
can't they do the same thing to Air India?
What they've done to railway.
Yes.
Uh, because I feel they are not operating in the same dynamic.
Okay, if I may,
Basically,
I will
I,
elaborate a little bit on my question to you. So, because what I was thinking was, let's say if in a similar hello, can you hear me?
yeah, yeah,
Right,
yeah,
sorry.
I can clearly.
So what I was saying was like the way they have taken 87% of this, I would definitely buy shares of Air India because I
Yeah,
know it's not going to vanish, whatever the correct jargon is in business terms. I know it's not going to like completely go solvent. I guess is that the word solvent? But
yeah. Basically, the government is backing it, so there is a chance. There's a good chance that it may not. You are not gonna lose your money.
right. And if you make it into kind of like you have a board like this, you trim it up and you kind of make it more efficient, then anything can make a profit. Even the best of Mumbai is kind of trying to do that with many, like the changes in the BMC chiefs keeping on changing. Sorry, I'll let you speak now about whatever I said. Sorry, continue.
It's okay.
Yeah.
See, I feel it's too early to say. See, whenever a movie is made, you have to wait for a while to understand what its impact has been. Right now, the board has been cut down, a CEO has been appointed, and we need to see in the next year or by the next budget what has happened. Now, given the situation because of the pandemic, I have a feeling that the railways may suffer and they may not perform so well. But I want to see what reforms they undertake and in the next few months whether they are able to turn around a few things here and there. So once that happens and you see a good profit going where the enterprise is running well, that's when you can say this has been a successful step. That is one thing. Secondly, whether you can repeat it with Air India, I think the biggest concern with Air India is the amount of losses it has suffered, and that has led to a debt increase with them. So they are suffering mainly because they don't have equity, because they have a lot of debt. Whatever money they are getting is just to sustain themselves, so there's no expansion, extending or anything like that. and the government has made up their mind that they want to sell it and get out of the business once and for all. So I feel even if they this has it's a little too late for Air India, because the government has already made its mind to sell.
Hmm.
So if they do end up constituting a board to run the airlines and try to make it more efficient, make it suffer less losses, my question is, the the airline business is a very competitive one, and
Correct.
Indigo, who's kind of the leader in that right now, and once upon a time there used to be Jet Airways and all.
Yes.
But Jet Airways, being a private enterprise, a very well-known enterprise, it failed at the end of the day because it got crushed with the debt and all. So my question is that there is no telling in this situation how the whole main burden is because of the debt. If the government is able to forget the debt, like write it off and give it a fresh start, maybe
Hmm.
then you can talk something. But then of course then the question is, why would government take such a big loss? So
That's
it's
right.
it's a very optimistic thing what they've done with railways, and I hope it pays off, so that
Well,
if
according to
Air
what I
India,
sorry, go on.
no, what I'm saying is, if this is successful and someone suggests that we do the same with Air India and give it a try, because it's very difficult to sell Air India right now. The buyers are not lining up as they expected. So if that doesn't happen, then obviously the government has to look forward to institutional reform,
Hmm.
and then they have a successful case study if the railways experiment
That was precisely
is
my
a success.
point because I think a lot of buyers just hovered around the idea of buying Air India, but then no one committed to it because there's a huge price tag of the debt, I think, which is upwards of 70,000 crore, if I'm not wrong.
From what I heard from one or two sources, what they said was there's a prominent business family in India who's willing to buy Air India. They're just waiting it for the airlines to go even cheaper. Like they are willing to buy, they are ready to buy.
Okay.
Just that
Okay.
they're waiting for it to become more cheaper. So they are just waiting it out, so that nobody else let's say no other prominent families have shown interest, and they are not interested. But there's one family who's interested. They want to get into the business, and they are already in the business, and they are waiting for the
Hmm.
prices to go down, get a
Are
better
you
deal
are
out
you
of it
talking
rather.
about Go Air?
No, I'm not talking about anyone. I'm just saying this is a story. This is
Okay,
a
fine.
it's a confidential thing. But then I don't want to be sued or anything.
Okay, okay, fine. Right. I think, everyone caught me. The reason why I picked this topic is because I want to talk about Air India.
Yeah.
But I think IRCTC, from what I see right now, they had a revenue of 2,353 crores in 2020. Now, I don't
Yeah.
know if this is how this is calculated and whether it's taking everything under consideration. But on that note,
Okay.
I think on that note, we will move on to the next beat.
Okay.
The next beat is international, and that is going
Oh,
to
my
be,
beat.
yes, that is going to be taken up by you. So
Yeah.
whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Okay. So the story I selected for this week is China's Mandarin only language policy sparks protest in Inner Mongolia. So over the past, from end of August, late August rather, uh, a few people have started protesting in Mongolia. Inner Mongolia in China. So it's a province which encompasses about 12% of landmass, the total landmass of China, and it only hosts a population of about 2%. So it's not very, it's a sparsely populated area, and amongst those, the population constitutes ethnic Mongolians. Now, they are culturally different from the Han Chinese,
Hmm.
and what has happened is they have their own language, which is Mongolian, and the Hans or the Chinese have their own language, which is Mandarin. So
Hmm.
what they've come up with the policy is, they unveiled it in June, and what they said was, eventually, right now it's going to start with a few subjects in the schools that are there in Inner Mongolia, whether medium of instruction is right now Mongolian. So what the Chinese government had proposed in June was that they are going to start some subjects that are only going to be taught in Mandarin, and then eventually in 3 years down the line, more or less all the classes in the schools in Inner Mongolia will be taught in Mandarin Chinese. So the ethnic Mongolians there have started protesting against the move because they feel this is uh, a way of destroying their culture, because they are trying to deny the Mongolians education in their own language, which may eventually lead to a decline in the speakers of the language. And there's a term that people use, sinicization. So they are saying Chinese government is trying to sinicize them, make them more culturally linked to the Han Chinese that are there, who constitute the majority of the population. So the protest started. A NGO, New York based NGO, they said that about thousands of people have started doing that. Some parents have stopped sending their kids to the school until this is rectified. And the reason it picked up now is because on the 2nd of September, the policy got implemented.
Hmm.
So the protest picked up 3-4 days before that, and now it's continuing now. Recent The latest that you can hear is that they've arrested a few people. They've What they've done is, the pictures and the videos that have surfaced of the protest, they're trying to identify those people who were present there, and they go after them and
Hmm.
target them to discourage them from opposing it. Now this is a rare sight, because rarely do you see dissent in China. So this has I don't know what the intensity
So
is, how
that
many,
part of
because it's
China,
very difficult.
it's very strange that they didn't change the name of the place. They called it Inner Mongolia. I thought they would have changed it.
Because what they did was, there was Outer Mongolia, which is the independent country,
Hmm.
Mongolia, and
Hmm.
this is Inner Mongolia, and Mongolia that they possess. And the Qing Empire used to control the entire country, but when the Qing Empire disintegrated in 1911,
Hmm.
the Russians conspired and tried to break away Mongolia from China. So in that tussle, a part of Mongolia stayed with China, and a part of Mongolia then became independent and eventually joined the, they were closely linked to the Soviet Union.
But I
So
thought they would
that,
have pulled off something like a Prayagraj.
who these guys, no, Chinese.
Yeah, I thought that is like pretty much I would expect that. But anyways, the point you were making is that they
Yeah.
have implemented a medium of instruction that goes against the minority ethnic Mongolians which live in Inner Mongolia. They might be a majority there, I suppose. But I guess since
No,
they
what
want
they've
to
tried to,
go
what
on.
these guys have tried to do over the years, have they've tried to settle more and more Han Chinese there, so that this happens, that the ethnic
Right.
Mongolians become a minority. I don't have the figures right now to say that they have become a minority, but then this thing is going on in Tibet, is going on in Xinjiang, is going
Correct.
on in Inner
I
Mongolia.
was going to just refer to Tibet at that point because they've
Yeah,
done the same thing there, right? They've
correct.
taken people from mainland China and told them to go settle down there so that, like, basically they start getting used to the
Demographic balance
culture and
changes.
tradition. Yeah, and they just basically obviously get overpowered ultimately. I think they
Yeah.
have they done that in Hong Kong as well. They must have, obviously, right?
No,
There.
no, they were not very successful in. See, in Hong Kong, it's too risky. Until the 1990s, Hong Kong constituted a big part of China's GDP, so they didn't want to fool around with Hong Kong.
Correct.
What I mean by that is, in 1997, when they got possession of it, Hong Kong accounted for a large chunk of the Chinese GDP. But as the years progressed, Hong Kong's share in the GDP has shrunk because other provinces in China have, become more prominent. So, and secondly, these guys are so they were autonomous in some sense, because after the national security law that was passed in June, it is no more that, that's no more the state. But to an
Hmm.
extent, these guys were autonomous, so this couldn't be implemented. Whereas Tibet is an autonomous region, Inner Mongolia is autonomous region, Xinjiang is autonomous region, but there is no autonomy to speak of.
Yeah, so I guess they just bullied them, right? One more thing I wanted to talk about, which is if we keep going about how China is upsetting its neighbors one by one, I think
Yeah,
it can be a whole podcast in itself.
correct.
You know, Like I think
Yeah,
there
I
are
agree.
several places like ASEAN, barring a few, majorly has developed this anti-China sentiment because of various reasons. One such thing I was telling you about was in the Philippines. There is apparently a fairness cream. We'll put the links of all of this underneath.
Yeah.
And there was this fairness cream which was being sold in Philippines, and the
Yeah.
tagline was Manila belongs to China. That is the tagline. Now I don't know the language, so I don't know how it fit in what narrative or what the ad was. So I might
Okay.
be saying it out of context, but this sparked a huge dissent against China. A lot of people of holding offices in Philippines in mid and higher level spoke against them.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the product itself, when they give you the address of where it's made, the address was given as Manila, comma, province of China. So these are just small examples how China like to play it a little adventurous, I guess.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So we
So
shall, on that note, shall we move on to the next topic?
yeah.
Okay. So the next beat is sports, which I'll be taking.
Hmm.
And here is the story. So, like y'all remember, if y'all are listening for the second, like if you're like the previous podcast and you're listening again, which is highly unlikely, we are definitely going to get new people listening all the time, and they'll be like, "Acha chalo." Not our thing. But anyways, let me continue. So this article is a continuation of what I was talking about. That was India playing in the online Olympiads, which is organized by FIDE, which is like what FIFA is for football. And so the last time I talked, I think I was talking about how we were in the quarterfinals with Armenia and we got through. And since then, we beat Poland in the semis, if I'm not wrong, and then we were playing the finals with Russia.
Yeah.
And the first, so there are two matches that you play in an online Olympiad. There's six players that will play. There are six boards. Six boards are played, of and different players from India and Russia facing each other. And then there are two matches
Hmm.
of that are played. So in the first game, it was a tie. Both of them, India and Russia, scored 3-3 because I think it was draw all around, or maybe
Okay.
someone must have won and it must have just gone equal. The second one they were playing and the game was going, it was a draw, they won one, and we had a chance of winning two games, one game for sure and one game which Nihal Sarin was playing, and he was almost in a very low time, and at that point what happened was he couldn't play his move and he lost on timeout. But then the Indian team realized that this is a problem with the servers, because what had happened to Armenia was they lost their internet, and that's why they had lost the game. And
Oh.
India had made sure that we would have double the internet, we would have backup generator, and the
Ah.
vice captain, who is N Srinath, he made sure that all these things are taken care of. Then we put an appeal to the appeals committee. The appeals committee went and they
Yeah.
decided and they realized, and the news broke out later on that a server, a Google server, some server called Cloudflare, had failed. So
Yeah.
genuinely, a lot of the people in South Asia or certain area which Cloudflare whatever manages, they lost their connection to chess.com, and so must have been the
Oh.
Indian players. So the FIDE
Acha.
president talked to the Russian team, and the Russian team agreed on jointly holding the gold medal with India. So India won
Hmm.
the online Olympiad. Now I'll give you a little more information
Yeah.
because I've done my research. And what what I found was, do you know who the president of FIDE is right now?
No.
The president of FIDE is a man called Arkady Djokovic. He was
Okay.
the he was the deputy prime minister of Russia under
Okay.
President Medvedev, who was
Yeah.
also the president while Putin basically kept constitutionally changing it so he holds power.
Prime Minister. He became. Yeah.
Yeah, and so basically, this man Djokovic, Arkady Djokovic, was also the assistant to the president when Medvedev, whatever his name is, I'm sorry, please forgive me if I get it
Medvedev.
wrong. Yeah, was there, and he was the president of FIDE. He talked to the Russian national team, and they said, yeah, we would, wouldn't mind sharing the trophy with. India basically. So that is one little
Mm-hmm.
fun fact that I wanted to share with you. Because for us, it is a little interesting fact, right? Because we know the other stuff about how it works with Russia. And
Correct.
the other thing is, on that same time, there's a small 14-year-old boy from Goa,
Okay.
and his name is, if I'm right, I might have got the first name and middle name replaced, but it's Leon Luke Mendoza, and he
Okay.
basically won a chess festival somewhere. I think it's in the Nordic area. I might be wrong, but he won it. He's a 14-year-old Goan boy, and I think it's great because he had played 8 matches, out of which he didn't lose any. I think he drew one. So that's how we got 7.5. Because for a draw, you get zero point 0.5.
Wow.
So I think that
Okay. Okay.
there's a great potential in India of, chess
For
players.
chess.
And I just wanted to mention about, Leon Luke Mendonça because of our connection with Goa. And it was at the same
Correct.
time that he won the gold. He won that particular chess festival while India won the online Olympiad. So I think it's a great day for chess, great day for India. And I actually gave you a lot of pre from what I was going to talk about. It is Srinath's interview, which I'm reading right now. PK Ajit
Okay.
Kumar is the person who's credited with the byline, and he basically, I'm just
Yeah.
going to I'm going to make it quick, and then we can take a group discussion on this. So N. Srinath basically talks about how chess has been shortchanged when it comes to official awards like the Arjuna Award or Khel Ratna and so and so. And there was a petition that was going on while India was playing the online Olympiad. So I think their victory, them winning the gold, is a great argument for paying more attention to our chess players, and creating a good infrastructure for them to flourish, because we might have some really good talent. And like you had mentioned, I mean, yeah, we'll go on now. So that is my very prideful moment, because I was following it, I saw it live, and I'm just very happy about it. Sailesh, your thoughts on this?
To be honest, I don't follow a lot of sports. I can't give out any details, but yeah, I saw a lot of opinion pieces after this that chess is not getting what it deserves. So they made a good. They tried to make an argument that now, at least now after this, you need to seriously take a, or rather rethink chess's position in India.
Yes, yes, I'm a firm believer of that.
Mm, that's all I can say about
Right.
this.
Okay. So I think on that great note, great fan of chess. I was in love with all these players. Very proud of the Indian team. So now we move on to the next beat, which is entertainment. And this beat
Yeah.
is going to be taken by you. Already, I can hear that you are sleepy with your yawns. So, no,
Sorry.
no, I'm kidding. Please go on, Sailesh, whenever you're ready.
So the story I chose for this particular beat this week is an interview done by Arjit Singh of A.R. Rahman, and the reason I thought it would be an interesting thing because Arjit Singh is an accomplished singer, A.R. Rahman is an accomplished singer composer. Both are one of the uh, uh, very this thing, what do you call that,
Talented
stalwarts of
musicians.
the
Yeah, yeah,
talented music or stalwarts of the Indian music industry.
definitely.
And uh, what has happened is the Indian Express has called this interview a masterclass where Arjit Singh talks to A.R. Rahman about his craft. And what they've done is they've given 10 pointers of the things that A.R. Rahman has talked about in the interview. The interview is about around 80 minutes long, and uh, I I had a difficulty in comprehending a lot of things that were said in the interview because I'm a casual follower of music and a very casual reader when it
Hmm.
comes to these things. So there were some terminologies which I was finding it difficult to understand because they talked about ragas and all those other elements that go into composition. So I'll just read the intro from the Indian Express article.
Okay.
And what I'll be doing is later on mentioning the link to the interview and at the same time give the link to the Indian Express article.
Okay.
So the intro starts off like this. In what can easily be described as a treat for music lovers, Maestro A.R. Rahman and singer Arjit Singh recently sat down for a virtual conversation about the Oscar winning music composer's craft. Arjit Singh asked questions. And A.R. Rahman patiently decoded his musical ideology, his methodology, his collaborations, the changing times, and the path that his career has taken, among many other things. So it pretty much gives you a gist of what the interview is about.
Hmm.
I genuinely enjoyed listening to the interview. Just that a few things I had to Google and understand what they were talking about, which I think it happens with any in any other beat that you don't really follow,
Yes.
but then you
Yes.
end up consuming the content for it. So uh, it's a very good
Interview.
interview. It's a very good insight into A.R. Rahman's thinking, but the thing is, it was not as prominently featured in the news as it should have otherwise. In fact, the
True.
interview came out on 31st August, and then the articles came out a day, 3 days later. And in the interview, basically, A.R. Rahman talks about his the influence he had, and Arjit Singh says that there's a very
Hmm.
Western feel to your music. At the same time, the influence is Indian. So how did that happen? And he says that
Right.
we come from a multicultural society where the thing was already there. That
You
Eastern
know,
things
by
were
the
there.
offset,
Huh.
if I might,
Yeah.
I will say that both of them, Arijit Singh and A.R. Rahman, are like
Yeah.
my favorites. I mean,
Okay.
Arijit Singh, initially, I'll tell you, if like there was, I used to find his music too romantic, he used to always sing these kind of songs. And there seems to
Yeah.
be a kind of, what do you call that? A generic kind of melody to his kind of songs. Initially, I thought,
Like a
and I
pattern.
was right, and I was mistaken clearly because all of our listeners, I'll tell you all to listen to a song that he sung for a Amazon web series called Afsos. The title track
Oh.
of that, it's brilliant. I think I should listen to it. And A.R. Rahman, I mean, that man has a ability to, no matter what generation he's playing music for, just surprise everyone.
Correct.
And this
He.
is itself is the two names itself coming together. Arijit Singh interviewing A.R. Rahman. I think it's a great thing, and I think I saw a bit of the clip, and I could see
Huh.
that they were quite comfortable with each other. They were talking. They had a good flow. So it's a very
Yeah.
enjoyable interview, right?
Exactly. It's a very easy to watch thing. Like you can at any given point of time you have free time, just watch it. It's a very relaxing thing, to be honest.
And I think, like the Indian Express article said, it would be a
Yeah.
treat for anyone who's a music enthusiast or who is in that industry. So they would kind of understand it far more than us.
Or anyone who just knows A.R. Rahman and is a bit curious about it, because A.R. Rahman even talks about the first time he was talking to Mani Ratnam, and Mani Ratnam, and they were trying the first film that A.R. Rahman was composing for him, and
Which was that? Which was that? Do you
I
know?
I actually don't remember the name, but
Okay. Was it
you
Roja?
must know. I don't remember. But
Okay.
basically, he talks about what he asked him and how, and basically, I would rather want the viewers to go and
Correct.
watch it.
Correct.
So I'm
Very
just
true.
building it,
Yes.
trying to build up
Yes.
to it.
Make sure every one of you, whoever either likes Arjit Singh or A.R. Rahman, and or is in the music industry, whoever you are, please watch this particular thing. We are putting the link down.
Yeah,
Right? Should we move
yeah,
on to the next beat?
yeah. Of course.
Okay. On that note, let's move on to the next beat, that is opinion of the week.
Yeah,
And this one has come on Times of India. It came on the 31st of August.
yeah,
There is no credit to the byline, and the reason of that will become fairly evident once I read the headline right now. Here's the
yeah.
headline: Legalize cannabis. Government wrongly banned an age old Indian habit. Now it must correct that mistake. It is 35 years since cannabis was criminalized in India under the aegis of a US driven war against drug crime. For several
Yeah.
centuries before the Indian government acted under the influence of Western agenda setting, Indians have been consuming cannabis products, mentioned even in early texts for medical and recreational use. A
Hmm.
2019 Union Social Justice Ministry report says a phenomenal 1.3 crore people use cannabis in its illegal forms, ganja and charas, apart
Yeah,
from 2.2 crore users for bhang, which is legal, putting such a huge population of cannabis users in constant fear of criminalization under the stringent Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act is just inhumane. It is also contrary to the Indian cultural precepts that accepted cannabis use. A
mm,
recent Vidhi Center for Legal Policy study notes several aspects of the ban, including driving sales underground, leading to dangerous adulteration and boosting more potent psychoactive drugs.
correct.
Ironically, many US states and countries like South Africa and Canada have legalized marijuana for personal use, while
Yeah,
bans continue to stick in slow to react India. There is still a huge much more statistics given in this particular opinion piece, but I
correct.
think we'll leave that for the listeners to read later. Now, coming to the point of legalizing cannabis, I think very great points. I don't know if I need to add anything more to this, because as many of our listeners, I would assume, would
Mm,
understand this fact that people do use cannabis, and you shouldn't kind of put that in the same category as the hard drugs.
like
You
cocaine and
understand?
all.
Like cocaine, heroin, whatever, like
Mhm.
those ones, whatever. I have no comments to say about that, but I think that they are quite harmful. But to put
Correct,
cannabis under that, because I think people are more violent under the influence of alcohol and all those things
correct.
than they are while consuming cannabis. And
I
it
agree.
is just something, not that I'm saying ban this thing or ban that thing. I'm just saying understand that the fact that this money, that if you're buying weed or if you're buying any cannabis product and that money is being used against the country for bad things, it's because you are not legalizing it. It's
Mm,
because the government is refusing to understand that if you get this, if you regulate it, not only is it going to be profitable, but it is going to just cut down a lot of crime, because this
mm,
is such a easy way for people who are already in crime to use this as selling or peddling drugs as a way
mm,
of earning money, and to put this under that, we've got such great places where we get such fine quality of cannabis, and many of this is actually exported outside, and that is
correct.
allowed, like
Yeah.
from Iduki Gold to Malana, the Malana Charas, which is sold in Amsterdam for 50,000 bucks. For yeah, that's the truth. And this hypocrisy is something that I think is very similar also in the whole beef thing, right?
Yeah.
You export beef from Gujarat for
Yeah.
people to consume outside, but then you're like, no, here you can't do anything,
Correct.
right? You're already allowing it. This is already happening.
Mm, I
So
agree.
just for like political mileage to make these, kind of statements and use the media to confuse people or give them the wrong representation of something is, I take something very seriously, and especially with this whole SSR case that has happened.
Mm,
I mean, I totally understand, because the NCB, the Narcotics Crime Branch, they have seen people who are doing really bad things. So they have that
correct.
image or whatever. They might be much more understanding. This is what I feel. And maybe I'm just too worked up to kind of come to a conclusion on this. So I'll let you speak a little bit about this, Silesh.
Uh, the truth is, I personally don't consume weed in any form, but am I a strong supporter of legalizing weed? Yes, I am, and there is a good reason for it. From a very uh, young age, I realized, you know, that I have known people who have consumed weed, and I have not seen them do anything irrational that has
Hmm.
hurt anyone or anything like that. That is one thing from personal experience. Then I read about the whole reason why we banned it, which was basically complying with the war on drugs that the US had raged, which has been a massive failure.
Hmm.
So, what I think is you have made a soft drug illegal. So people have turned to pushing hard drug in the market, the peddlers, because there's a
Hmm.
larger margin to be earned there. And what has happened in that scenario is people have started consuming hard drugs, and the lives have been devastated and all those things. But at the same time, when it comes to weed, if you legalize it, it will not harm anyone in any sense unless you
Hmm.
abuse it, which is a personal. Same thing goes with alcohol. If you abuse it, you're gonna destroy your life. But if you take it in moderation, you're careful. It's something that is okay to consume. Same
Yeah.
thing, same argument can be made with weed. And I realized the extent of consumption of weed when I moved to Noida, because I have seen people smoke weed on the roadside while having a cup of tea. So that's how casual it is.
Yeah.
And it's a widely consumed drug. If you legalize it, all the sales that are currently going are basically black market, is
Hmm.
going to become a white market. It's going to be a revenue generator. And at the same time,
Definitely.
what is going to happen is, like you said, the whole criminal angle to it will finish. And in a way, I feel there has to be an assessment of what is good and what is bad. And if it doesn't, like for example, you clearly know where cocaine is and where weed is. So do you
Yeah.
categorize them together? That's a wrong thing. They shouldn't be categorized together. And at the same
Correct.
time, if should weed be legal? Yes. Do I personally consume it? No, but I still see a rationale behind legalizing it.
Hmm. Yes. Okay. So on that note, I'll just conclude and you tell me if I'm saying anything out of what I feel. We need to look at it very honestly. What is this thing? What are we doing? And what is beneficial economically? What is beneficial for the people? What is beneficial for law and order? And I think you will get the answer.
Yeah.
Okay. On that
Yeah.
note, we will move on to the final beat, which is the
Yeah.
interview of the week. And that is going to be taken by you. Anytime you're ready.
So the interview I chose for this particular beat is of IPS officer Ajay Lamba. He has written a book called Gunning for the Godman, the true story behind Asaram Bapu's conviction. It's written by Ajay Lamba and Sanjeev Mathur, and Ajay Lamba has appeared for the interview. The interview was conducted by Saurabh Dwivedi of the London Top, and it was basically on the book. And where what Dwivedi does is he is asking Lamba about the book, and Lamba was the investigating officer, I think, until the charge sheet was filed against Asaram Bapu. So
Hmm.
it's like a first person account of what happened, and it brings a lot of interesting factoids about the case. And given the prominence that Asaram Bapu had, or the notoriety that he enjoys right now, uh, it's a very interesting read from what
Hmm.
the interview has portrayed. And in that, he basically brings forward a lot of uh, details of how the case was pursued, how the case began with the victim coming forward, and from the day it started till the day charge sheet was filed, and eventually, gives an account of how Asaram Bapu's this whole nexus was exposed, and
Right.
it gives behind the scenes information of it. So it's a very interesting interview, and it's a very interesting interview because of the way it's conducted. So the Lallan Top has a particular series called Kitab Wala, where basically the interviewer uh, goes and reads a book for the particular week, and then he has the guest come over, the person who's written the book, and then they have a conversation about the book, the author, and many other things related to it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I think, for any person who enjoys reading non-fiction,
yeah.
the account or the books that are written by, say, people in service or people, bureaucrats at, very high ranking positions, the details that they can come out with, whether they've
Yeah.
served under like a particular, government, or whether they've served under these certain circumstances, and they can give you such, I mean, I don't know if this is the right word to use, but the dirt on
Hmm.
these things, where you get the under, like you come to know the reality from there, because this is something they can't prove, right? So they might give you some information that they couldn't prove in court, but they have first hand. They can mention it in a book in their way by saying allegedly. And if you're getting a first person account from a person who's in the IPS, or who's, in such positions, it is definitely interesting. I
And
remember. Yeah, go on, please.
no, no, you go ahead.
So I'm reading Rakesh Maria's. Finally, I've bought it quite a while back, but I
Hmm.
am starting to, read the Rakesh Maria's autobiography. That is, let me say it now. And he had
Hmm.
been the commissioner of police of Mumbai.
Even
Uh,
I'm reading that right now. Same.
Arey, nice. Or did you
And
realize? Did you find out about his surname Maria and how confusing it can
yeah,
be?
yeah, 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 yeah. Any
So
you
we'll let the listeners, find that out by
yeah.
themselves. If you want to find out the confusing part for about Rakesh Maria's surname, read his
Yeah.
book, please. He's really done a great job writing it. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And right, talking about Ajay Lamba, who's investigated Asaram Bapu's, the arrest and whatever followed or whatever was before it and all. I think this is a very interesting topic. I myself have don't know a lot of information about it, so I'm sure the listeners would get a great insight about these things. And it helps you figure out other stuff also. Like then when you see a similar case, you understand what's happening behind the scenes. Then you
Correct.
also know the right questions to ask, because sometimes like
Yeah.
Rakesh Maria and all that, when they're writing about certain cases now, what are they going
Yeah.
to do? They are going to give you an understanding of what is the protocol,
Yeah.
right? Because as a civilian, you don't know the protocol that the IPS people follow and what is supposed to be done. Let's say something groundbreaking has happened. So whether there needs to
Correct.
be a special task force that needs to be constituted, or what investigation takes place. So these kind of insights, this kind of knowledge that you're getting from these books is it's quite valuable. I feel it's very interesting also,
Correct.
and I think the listeners would love it. Go on.
Uh, One more thing I would like to point out is in journalism, there's a lot of limitations. Like a journalist has a lot of access, and he gets a lot of information about a particular case, but there's a very little, very small part of it that he can actually speak about or go to print with. Because, for example, if he knows exactly what has happened, he cannot write about it unless there's a confirmation from an official.
Correct.
He
Yes.
has a source. But what happens in this case is the journalists have covered the case extensively. There's a lot of detail that's there outside. But then what
Hmm.
happens from the perspective of a police person? You get a more enriched experience of
Right.
understanding the case, and there's a lot of things that you don't read about in the papers that you can read about in these particular books.
Hmm.
So, and in general also, if you talk about Ajay Lamba and his journey, what from where he's coming from, and how he rose up in his life. It's a very interesting thing. He initially studied in Jawahar
JNU.
JNV, no JNV, Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalay.
Oh, okay.
So these are a sort of uh, hostel facilities, education institutes with hostel facilities, where particular students from economically this
Backward
thing
classes.
backward classes can give an entrance exam, and the government then pays for their education, and they can stay at those facilities, and for the whole year they study there. There's no money that they have to pay, and the government kind of has these institutes all across the country to cultivate the talent that's there. So he's one of those
That's
people.
great. Yeah.
So eventually he did that, and then became an engineer. Even at one point he worked for Bharat Heavy Electronic Limited, and from there he
Oh,
eventually, yeah, even in private sector, like he said he worked for HCL and TCS for a while, I think, and then eventually moved on to the government sector.
see now this is so much different than Rakesh Maria's book, right?
Correct.
So, and one more thing I wanted to talk about was when these officials write books, they are
Yeah.
also, remembering that particular moment, and then they are documenting the thought process.
Yeah.
So you're following the logic that they are using, and when you just
Exactly.
by reading the logic that they're following, you're like, oh, okay, this is what is important, and this is what they're focusing on. And yeah,
Exactly. Unfortunately, I have not read the book, so I can't talk about it in much greater detail. So, but of course, I will look forward to reading it, and definitely the viewers will find it an interesting read.
yes, we do recommend this.
Yeah.
And I think on that note, shall we conclude?
Yes, of course.
Okay, all our listeners will pay us some money. No, I'm just kidding. So we conclude this show, the second episode of 100% sale of journalism ethics here. If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, the name is a clickbait. The show is going to be pretty nice and serious. Not serious, actually. We're making a lot of fun also. But it is going to make sense. So don't think like it's something that we are just, what, I don't know, selling journalism, I guess. Yeah. Sailesh, any parting words that you'd like to say to our 5 followers?
Uh, Please continue to listen to this broadcast.
Especially Ramesh. She's been there from day one,
Yes, of course.
Ramesh, yes. Anyways, Ramesh, please tell your friends also.
Of course.
And on that note, Sailesh, we shall take their leave and say goodbye.
Yeah. Thank you for
Okay.
all those
Thank
listening.
you. Yes.